Jay the draft goals.
Right.
And he looked at them and he said, "You know, Roger, those are perfect."
Right.
And your group would come together and say, "That's terrific, Roger. We're done."
Right.
And he said, "Is that what you want them to do?" And I said, "Well, no." He said, "Okay, go back and unperfect it.
That's right.
Go back and fuzz it up.
Yeah.
And create something that's a little more of a blob, and let them, because the purpose is for them to take ownership of it, not for you to give them back a perfectly refined, beautiful statement."
Yeah, and again, this is really another area that carries over, at least for me, that carries over from conflict work, which is that the process of doing it is actually part of the product as much as the product is. So that process of them engaging their goals and really coming to an agreement as a group about what it is that they value and want to achieve, that's a crucial piece of it. And so like Roger just said, coming at them with the perfect language for their goals, it actually could be counterproductive. So what that looks like at the end of that tagging process, let's say you had those 5 participants or 4 participants, they gave 12 responses, and you ended up with, let's say, 3 shared goals among that group of people and a couple of uniques. I apologize for the clock if you can hear it. I know it's loud. I can hear it through my headphones, that's how I know. So 3 shared goals and a couple of unique responses. Those then get printed out for the participants and used in the in-room process. And again, I said earlier I wouldn't focus too much on the in-room process, but they receive that list of goals back, and then you engage them in that process of, okay, here's how we arranged your work. Tell us if this is right. What needs to be changed here? Are your individual goals in the right places? And you go through that process of, in the room, facilitating with the participants of them perfecting their goals as a group. During that process, this is the last paragraph on that first page, during the facilitation, participants connect their why responses to their new shared goals, and then the researcher after this facilitation session will go back into the database to do those updates. But it's in that session that the individuals tell sort of passion stories about why why they gave the goals they did and why it's important to them. And in the database, that's an important piece that I'll talk about here in a second. But in the room, really what they're doing is connecting their values to their shared goals. They're really saying, here's my story, here's a one-word summary of that story, and I want you to connect my passion to this shared goal that we created. So out of the 3, or they may end up with more out of that session, but let's say they end up also with 3 shared goals that they've reworded. They then put their passion onto those words by attaching these summary words to their shared goals. So you as a researcher leave that in-room facilitation with a set of reworked shared goals and passion stories and the summary words that they've then attached to those shared goals. And I probably could have written that on this page, but I'll talk about it in this next session, because then you as the researcher, you go back to the database. Usually between that process that I just described and the next where you get groups together, you usually have a break. Sometimes it's an afternoon, sometimes it's a couple weeks, but there needs to be a period of time where you as a project person, as a researcher, can go back and do the database work that's necessary.
Okay. Let's push ahead just for the moment.
Yeah.
To your next page.
Yeah. So what happens then? You go back into the database at that point, and as I said, you have the updated group shared goals, which in the database they're basically the tags that you gave, the what tags. And you change those. You go back and you edit them, and I'll show you how to do that in our next block of time here. But you go back and you edit those tags to reflect what they did in the room. You also add in to the database the why stories that they gave, so that you have record of that. and you add the summary words that they gave to those what categories. And again, I can show you in the database how to do that by adding in the summary words that they gave and assigning them to the what goals. And here's where the crucial piece comes. I created this little graphic on the left to show you. As you do this, as you add in those why statements and you reorient those group what tags, as soon as you add in those why statements and you go to print out a report of the new shared goals, you can at that point print out a list that'll give you not just the shared goals that they've created, but also the why stories that they gave and the words, and all of the individual how ideas that they gave in the first place. So to describe how that works, if you can go back up to the top and imagine, okay, participant 1 gave a what response, a why response, and a how response. Base remembers that those three are connected. He said, this is what I want, this is why I want that specific thing, and this is how, this is the idea, the action idea that I can use to get that specific thing. So moving all the way through this, when you have these new group goals, the database knows what individual goals that group goal came out of, and it pulls out all of those individual hows into that group goal. So again, using our example of the 3 shared goals of this group, those 3 shared goals came out of 12 individual responses and 12 individual how ideas. So the database remembers, okay, this group goal came out of these 6 individual what responses, and therefore I need to attach those 6 individual how responses to that group goal. It basically, the way Jay describes it is it kind of has a genealogical memory, where it remembers sort of ancestrally back what the father of this what was, and what the father of this group goal was, and it pulls all of that data onto that group goal and arranges them so that you have it all. So that actually, if you wanted to, you could provide just for that group a sheet that shows their new group goals, the passion words that they assign to it, and all of the how ideas for each of those goals that they came out with. Go ahead, Roger.
Do all of the why stories also become attached to the new group goals?
That's the one piece. It's interesting that he created the database in such a way that in order for those action ideas, the hows, to get reported out in the form of a printable report, you have to assign a why or a passion word to that group goal. And the reason that he did that is that he wanted to make the point in data that your how, your success at doing the actions is dependent on your values. And so it doesn't report them out unless you assign that why, whether it's their passion word or a story. But you do have to actually go in and, for example, when you enter in the stories that they gave in the group facilitation process, you have to click on a little box that says, make this reportable. Because sometimes, particularly in conflict situations, they don't want to share those stories. And so maybe you only share their word. But either way, you have to actually click and say, yes, make this reportable. And then once you do that and assign it to a group what, then it'll pull all of those individual hows back onto that group what.
I see. Yeah. So let me play this back and make sure I understand it.
Sure.
That in order for the particular person's hows to be included in the final report, the why story or the why word that is connected to that goal needs to be clicked as reportable.
Yeah, so here's a little bit of an interesting piece. It doesn't necessarily need to be his why. It could be anybody's. As long as there is one person's why summary word, their passion summary word, or their story assigned to a group what, it'll report out all of the how ideas. It doesn't necessarily need to be his why. Just as long as there is a why attached to it. So for example, let's say a participant, they gave one response on the database, and they gave a what, they gave a why, and they gave a how. And in the facilitation process, someone else gives a story, and the participant realizes, oh, that story really illuminates the goal that I gave. And in the end, they end up assigning that other person's why story or their word to his goal. That original person's ideas are still going to be reported because somebody's passion was connected to that. It doesn't necessarily need to be his, and his original why response out of the data can also be reportable too if you click on it. But as long as somebody's why field is attached to that, it'll get reported. It doesn't necessarily need to be his.
Okay, I think that will probably come back to that later. I'm sorry, I've tried to make the phone stop ringing.
Sure.
That's the problem meeting in houses. So, so I think what we've got is so that the report that you're able to generate imagine we're at the end of the youth. The 20 and under group has met. They've reached an agreement. Now, there are going to be some people who put in their what, why, how, who are not going to be physically present at the meeting.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. So, what will the report look like? So we have the meeting. They reach agreement on goals. They come up with passion words, and they then attach their passion word to one of the goals.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then what we do as researchers is, I assume that we capture these on laptops in Microsoft Word or something like that.
Yeah, that's always the best way.
And paste them into the database.
Right.
Rather than trying to have the database be online.
Right.
While we're talking, right?
Right.
Okay.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, what's the report look like, or the reports look like that you will be able to produce for them?
Sure. So, do you want to know what it physically looks like, or what's contained in it?
Let's do both.
Okay. So I don't think I have a